Hey everybody, we got a pretty exciting episode. Well, at least I'm excited. I'm sure a lot of other people will be as well. And by a weird series of events and everything, we planned on doing this virtually, but then he didn't tell me that he didn't end up traveling, and so we are literally sitting 15 minutes apart from each other, recording this over Zoom. Which, whatever, it is what it is. We'll still capture the awesomeness of it. So we have Master Sergeant retired Kevin Nelson. Kevin, came into the Army 1997, right? Wasn't it, Kevin?
It was 96. Yeah,
96.
I got to battalion late 96.
Yeah. Okay. So 96, and he spent most of his time up at 275. And we'll talk a little bit of that story about how some of the things that he did and the events that led to 275, him leaving 275 and going to RHQ, where he worked in the RS8 shop, and then from there he retired from active duty and went and worked in some civilian positions, eventually becoming the director for the 75th Ranger Regiment of the RAID program. And I'll have him describe that to you. He tried to kind of outline it and what they do and everything else prior to the episode. It probably will sound better coming from his mouth. So I'm also very excited about this episode because Kevin and I served for a long time in BCO 275 together. Then we kind of bounced around each other in different positions within 275, and then we ended up working up in the S3 shop under other greats like Teakle, I forgot the other ops sergeant major's names. Anderson, also, and then Bernie Felino. And Eric Dalton also worked up there with us somewhere, and some officers that we won't name. But no, I'm just kidding. So we will try to keep this episode on track and talk about his time within the 75th, and not try to go into too many young Private Nelson and Private Burke stories about our shenanigans back then. Plus, we have to keep it semi-R, so to speak. So it'd probably be the best, because all of our kids will probably listen to this.
Professional, right? Professional.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so that's it for the intro. Hey, Kevin, man, I know when I initially asked you about this, I think it was Ranger Rendezvous. I asked you if you would do this, and you were like, "There's no way in hell I'd ever do this." So I agree, or I'm glad that you finally agreed to do it.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for having me. Yeah, it was, I don't know, just over a year ago when it was Ranger Rendezvous. I had done I'd been inducted as a distinguished member of the regiment. And so I invited some folks over, and you were asking me about this. And I was like, no way, man, there's no way I'm going to do this. I don't get in front of people. I don't tell my story. But I've listened to the podcast you put out, and they've been pretty awesome. They take me back to some pretty fun times and good memories. And so I appreciate, you having me on and letting me, come back into the fold. But I also wanted to congratulate you on your distinguished member of the regiment nomination and ceremony about a month ago. That's awesome to see. And but yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. That definitely came as a surprise, and I blame Julian Chavez for that. He's the one that recommended my name. It was definitely an honor, and it was pretty cool to be part of that. I actually have the certificate sitting right over here, so maybe I should hang that up. Maybe I should hang it up over that logo. Well, I can't help but talk about Ranger Rendezvous, like especially being out of the regiment, coming back and being at Fort Benning now, and getting to be around everybody during Ranger Rendezvous. But what I just found hilarious is all these years later, bunch of Rangers standing around in your kitchen that served together. Some of us did, some of us didn't, and we just divulged back into being privates again, and just absolutely just ragging on each other and just giving each other shit, so it's always funny when Rangers do that.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And one of the things I've been thinking about, I know you talk a lot about the brotherhood on here, and I don't want to get too far ahead on that stuff.
No, go ahead, man.
But being fortunate enough to serve for as long as I did, I kind of have like groups of friends. I got like the first 4 years buddies I always hang out with, and I got like the next set of squad leaders I was with, and on up the chain, and I think at that rendezvous we had probably 20 years worth of Rangers in there, and you're right, we always tell the same kind of stories, always rag on each other. And it was funny that I think one of your episodes you brought up that the second platoon BCO used to be nicknamed the Hermaphrodites, and I remember telling you that story. I remember telling you that story that night, and I don't know if that was a a real nickname or if that was just what our platoon called you, but I'm glad it made it onto the podcast. And we called first platoon the Giblets.
I didn't know that one. Well, when you told me that, that was the first time I'd ever heard that. I had no idea, but I was a private and I just thought that's what Ranger platoons look like. It wasn't until like later on, and then the great firing of, I think it was 2000 in second platoon, and real people came over, like Josh Wheeler came over and other leaders came over, and I was like, oh, this is what this is supposed to be like. So now I look back and I'm like, yeah, we probably deserve the term Hermaphrodites. But yeah, you talk about old Ranger buddies. I still don't know why you're friends with Craig Harmon, though. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me, because, and I hate him. I still hate him, because my first day in Ranger Regiment, man, that guy screwed me over. Man, God, he screwed me over.
Yeah, when we get together, it's about having a good time. We're both just as quick-witted, when it comes to ragging on each other and, all that kind of stuff. So we just always have a good time whenever we get together, and it's kind of always the same. We just have fun, but it's good.
Yeah. No, I agree. And Ranger Rendezvous is just an awesome thing. I think it's awesome that they started doing the week for the regimental sergeant major too, leaving. Like, man, Colonel Kersey, that's an amazing thing. And that was really fun. That was awesome.
Yeah, I hated that I missed it. I was actually traveling that week too. And I've always kind of wondered, like, where's the RSMs, going away, or I'll be sitting in these sitting on the regimental staff. We're sitting here talking about planning and where all the generals are going to sit, and I'm like, well, where are all the CSMs going to sit at this? I'm like trying to be that guy.
No, that's good,
because they everybody, all our leaders are important, but the RSMs, I mean, they've been in the organization for forever. The retired ones, they moved on, and they're leading the Army, and they deserve all that just as well. And I know there's no real intent to slight those guys. It's just it's the culture that we kind of live in, not just in the regiment, but just Army wide.
No, it absolutely is. Well, I think you talk about traditions and stuff like that, but also the impact like regimental sergeant majors have. I mean, you look at Donaldson, the one that just left, 19 deployments, I think, is what he had. Like, unbelievable commitment to the organization. But more of my point was the traditions kind of aspect of it is we just don't ever think about it unless somebody says something. Like, it's just the way it's always been, that there's a Ranger Rendezvous every 2 years. And the fact that there's actually not going to be a Ranger Rendezvous this coming summer because, Colonel Kersey's staying in for a third year, like, it probably made people go, well, wait, are we really going to go 3 years before we get everybody together? So, right. But if no one asks the questions.
Yeah, you're right. And the other thing is the younger guys, they don't understand, or let me rephrase, us older folks that have been around, we think it's the way it is. Like, oh, you got 15 deployments. All right, cool. So does this guy. So does this guy. But all the younger Rangers too that are coming in these days that are maybe you've got one, in the last 2 or 3 years, and for them to see that, what their leaders have gone through and just kind of what those experiences are, I think there's already a level of credibility that those leaders have, but that just makes those younger Rangers that much more hungry to learn what they have to say.
Yeah, I agree. No, absolutely. Well, that was a good little kind of deviation. We're not here to just talk about the Ranger Regiment. We're here to talk about Kevin Nelson. And I know that you're going to struggle with that because you don't like to talk about yourself, but you are the legend that we want to talk about, and something I didn't say in the intro, and I want to say it, and I'll probably, highlight it a little bit more in the episode. Like, you saved my ass, man. And what I mean by that is, I left Ranger Regiment after the platoon sergeant time, after we were platoon sergeants together. I went up to ROTC. I came back. And the thing about Ranger Regiment is if you're out of loop for a year, you're out of loop for 2 years, a lot of things change, and how things are done in the current, especially during the GWOT, things that are going on. And, so when I got back and I went immediately to the S3 shop and you were the assistant S3, you definitely helped me get back into the fold, and I appreciate that, and all the things you did. So I just wanted that on a podcast that I'm publicly thanking Kevin Nelson. So
Yeah, thanks for highlighting my time in the S3 shop. I appreciate
yeah.
that. Now, yeah, I mean, that's what we do. It's for the good of the organization, and you bring folks in and you try to get everybody up to speed as fast as you can and as best as you can. And sometimes you're good at that, and sometimes it's just time to get after it. But it was great having you back. I was thinking about during your intro that we did spend a lot of time in BCO together, and we were platoon sergeants together for a while in different companies and things like that. But we kind of crossed paths here and there, but really it was when we were in the 3 shop after you came back, and we really started kind of getting to know each other and
that's true,
with each other and all that. And so you never know how these journeys are going to go and when you're going to cross paths. And anyway, it's it was good to get you back, and you're obviously out there still crushing it.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And time on staff, man, it's always hard, but I will say that we had a hell of a lot of fun. I mean, with you, me, Eric Dalton, like it sucks being on staff. We definitely, man, we had some nights where we couldn't even stay awake, like during TFTs, because we were just doing so much, but that definitely made it better. Like that, like trifecta of individuals.
Yeah. And a funny story, just real quick. If you remember Mike Kelvington, he was, we were farewelling him, I don't know, a little over a year ago from the regimental staff. And he brought up a story about our S3 shop time, back then at 275. And another name that was up there was Ray Castillo. And,
yeah.
And, it's funny because if you think about us 4 NCOs, you, me, Dalton, and Ray, I'm sure you were injured and hurt and all that, but like the 3 of us, he goes, it was like a MASH unit up there in the 3 shop, because the 3 of us.
I never thought of that.
And like you're the only one that can go out on real missions. And so anyway, it's just it was kind of a product of the times. We'd been at that point we'd been at it for well over 10 years, and there was a lot of those folks around that were injured but were contributing. And so again, like it was just all part of the moving the organization forward.
Okay. All right. We'll eventually get into more talking about you and why you want to be a Ranger and all that stuff. But, it's crazy to think of the platoon sergeants around our generational time. And not only the ones that, obviously sacrificed their lives, obviously McDowell and stuff like that. There's others, across the other battalions as well. But how many of us got injured and got blown up and got shot and everything else? I mean, there was other Rangers that did, but man, platoon sergeants, like it seemed like every time we had a deployment, there was a platoon sergeant that was catastrophically wounded, like from every single task force. It was unbelievable. Yeah.
I think we saw an evolution from the platoon sergeant carries the litter, or he's with the medic, in the back formation early on in our careers, to the term fighting platoon sergeant started to come around, and being at the point of friction and placing ourselves up there where the platoon needed us, and sometimes we probably got out ahead of ourselves, in some cases, I'm guilty of that, but it was always, we were, as it should be, we're the ones with the experience. By that point, we got 8 or 10 trips, and you're just putting yourself in places that you need to be so that the mission is successful. And that comes with risk. And sometimes, we were able to mitigate that stuff, and sometimes we weren't. Yeah.
I used to always tell my PLs, after my first PL, that, the concept of fighting platoon sergeants, the way I used to describe it to them is you want me where split-second decisions need to be made. It's not because I'm some amazing individual. I just have more experience than everybody else in this entire platoon, to include you, and so that's where I need to be. And that's where I'm always going to be, at those, you can say friction points or kinetic points or whatever you want to call it, and then that, resulted in us being, where shit was getting blown up and getting shot all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely wild times back then,
It is.
Anyway, I'm glad that, those of us that were able to make it unscathed, or, partially scathed, made it. And, always thinking about, those that didn't. I was actually at 275 just last week, and visiting, checking out some of the areas. And I always stop by Charlie Company and see Dave McDowell's, memorial there in the barracks. And so anyway, just good to always think about that stuff and remember those guys.
All right. Well, I have to tell this, and I believe that I made a placard. I want to say I did. I'm sorry. Sometimes it's hard to forget, but there's the patch. Dave was he a Mad Slasher? No, he was a.
Yeah, I believe he was.
Oh, okay.
I believe he was third.
Yeah.
He was a third platoon.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. So he was. Yeah. So his platoon patch that he was wearing the night he got injured was taken off of his uniform by Spicer. And Spicer, when I was Seacoast First Sergeant, gave me that patch. Now, it was not easy. It took him like 3 months to finally hand it to me, and he was bawling his eyes out when he finally gave it to me so that we could put it in that memorial. So that patch that's actually up there is from Dave's uniform. And that's in there. And I believe we had a plaque made, signifying that Justin gave it to us. So,
okay. No, that's awesome. Every time I go back, there's more and more work being put into the hallways, being put into those memorials. And, it's just awesome to see that, even Rangers today are still remembering that stuff and realizing how important it is. And it's amazing just how deep ingrained in the culture that sort of stuff is. It's important.
It is absolutely important. And if, we don't preserve it and we don't tell the backstory, then it gets lost, or, and that's part of the reason, we're doing these podcasts too, is that, we want to capture these stories and, the individuals and everything else. And, so that it exists for all times,
Yeah,
so that's awesome. All right. Anyway. Okay. So let's start back at the beginning. Let's backtrack. That was good though. I mean, there's a lot there that we just talked about, so why did young, Kevin Nelson want to be a Ranger?
So probably like most other guys, knew a little bit about it and wanted to test myself and kind of figure it out. But, going back in time a little bit more, I think I basically wanted to get away from, I don't want to go too dark, but I wanted to get away from my family that I had. I grew up in in sort of rough household. And then I had a bunch of friends that kind of helped to influence me, throughout high school. And one of them, some folks on this podcast may know, but, back to the family thing, I had a stepdad that I found out, wasn't my real dad until I was joining the Army, looking at my birth certificate, hey, why does this not add up? And so he had come from, he had deserted a military that he was serving, foreign military, and come to the U.S. illegally and all that. And so really strict upbringing, having to watch my siblings. Had three younger siblings, and I'm 9-10 years old, responsible for them, for all day. And when things weren't done, well, we're getting locked out of the house in the summertime in California as punishment, just super weird things. And so I just wanted to get away from all that stuff. And ironically, as I start getting up into high school, he's like, hey, you need to be more disciplined. So we're going to put you into Air Force ROTC in high school, and you're going to learn, how to be disciplined. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm the problem, but let's do this. And so I get in there, and what I found was I had never thought about the military in my life before that, but I loved the structure. I loved the attention to detail. I love putting my uniform together. I love doing the marching stuff. And, we all, in the Ranger Regiment, it's we hate that stuff. It's terrible. And I hate it now, but as a high school kid, I could take that and I could take those skills and lead my peers. Right. I could teach them how to do these things. And I would go out and do community service, not necessarily because I wanted to, but I'd go do these color guards because it would get me out of the house. And I didn't have to go home till 7 p.m. at night, and so I started to really buy into ROTC. And while I was there, a buddy of mine, he was a year ahead of me, Brian Davis, if anybody knows him, he was in Alpha Company. He was a year ahead of me. And a couple of his buddies are like, hey, we're going in the Army. We're going to going to be Rangers. We heard there's a Ranger unit at Fort Lewis up in Washington, and that's what we're going to do. And so, about my junior year, I'd kind of been mulling that over and decided to sign up. We both had a really good recruiter, but got, not a typical recruiter story. Gave us option 40s like right when we walked in, and ended up kind of mentoring us throughout the process, and helping us with PT and all that kind of stuff. And long story short, he went in the Army a year ahead of me while I finished up my senior year. And so he's sending me letters from basic training. He's sending me, letters that he just graduated RIP. And then he starts sending me pictures of like, he's hanging out in a hammock in Thailand and with a tattoo, and I'm like, oh man, I need to do that. Cause we all grew up watching Rambo, Vietnam movies and all that. And I'm like, man, I made the right decision. That's what I need to go do. And so, finished off my senior year. I took, the minimum classes to get through. Almost didn't graduate, but I, had PE twice a day and, that kind of stuff, just to kind of get me ready. And that's what I did. I went and typical path after that, basic AIT, RIP, airborne, whatever the path was back then. And showed up at 275 in, it was November 96. And if anybody is on the podcast was around back then, they probably remember the battalion being out doing squad exevals, and there was a huge snowstorm that happened, and they were pretty pissed off when they got back, and they spent about 10 days out, and you were pretty pissed off, and probably 30 or so of us rippies were fresh meat, including like Ray Fuller and Brian Barker up there. So anyway, that's how I got there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I always love hearing the stories of when people arrive to Ranger Regiment. It always seems like the people that we talk to, like they get there like right after some exercise or something like that. So everybody had just got back from a training exercise in Hunter Liggett, and apparently there was like a bunch of issues with everybody getting back, and they were delayed and stuff. So yeah, everybody was pretty pissed off. So, and I was coincidentally supposed to go to third platoon, and then that turned into an argument, and I won't get into that story, but ended up in second platoon. So
yeah, when I got there, little known fact, I got married right before I finished high school to my first wife, and before I finished high school, I said that about a month before I graduated.
Holy shit!
Yeah, stupid. Anyway.
Don't suggest it.
And so we had a plan to like. I would get integrated, and she would show up a few months later. And, but there's a reason she's my ex-wife. And that was partially because she basically hopped on a Greyhound, after I'd been at 275 for like 3 or 4 days, and she comes up, so I ended up, while the battalion's still out in the field, I ended up having to move out of the barracks with like no money. So we lived in the Motel 6 on, 72nd, I think it is, in Hosmer up there, kind of like
holy shit.
Yeah. So I lived up there in the motel, and I would get a cab from there, take a cab to the Lakewood Mall, hop on a bus, get to the Greyhound station up by the stadium, the Cowan Stadium on Fort Lewis, and then walk to work and be there, before first call. I did that for probably a week or two until everybody came out of the field, and met my platoon sergeant, who kind of became my real father figure, was Gunny Barreras. And he's like, "You're doing what? No, you're not. Your fire team leader is going to take you to look at apartments, from now until you find one." I felt terrible about that, because we get off work and there's my team leader driving me around to look at places to live. And the only thing I could afford was way out by what's the town? Fircrest out there.
Holy cow.
And so he my team leader, he calls up a buddy. He's like, "Hey, I know you live over in these apartments, so I want you to take my Ranger to work every day if you can." And I'll never forget, to this day, never worked with a guy aside from him driving me to work, but it was Specialist Becker from ACO, be at my door every day at 5:15, ready to head to work. And I was like the worst. That's like the worst, I'm the worst private story ever. Because I also didn't have a driver's license. And so,
Holy shit.
I was like that guy, and I was just a wreck, anyway, I learned a lot of hard lessons, but I learned a lot of good lessons from Gunny and that leadership and my squad taking care of me. And, all those things that you should learn. I feel like I learned them the right way.
Yeah. I love stories, where people talk, and there's things that, current Rangers and, leaders across, the military at that, first tier level that they can learn. Like, hey, sometimes it means you've got to do things that are unconventional to take care of your soldiers, because you didn't know any better. You were just trying to solve the problem. Like, hey, I'm supposed to be in Ranger Regiment. I've got to stash this chick somewhere.
Right. Yeah. And, that's where I really learned like what taking care of people looks like. I didn't know it at the time. Frankly, it took me years to kind of reflect on that and think back. I knew it was good what they were doing for me, but until I found myself in similar situations, that's when I really started to learn like, okay, this is what they actually did for me, or what they were doing. And that was to talk about Gunny for a minute. That's just how he was. We talk about us getting together at Ranger Rendezvous, and every time us guys from 3rd Platoon BCO get together, we always talk about Gunny, and his legacy on us, and how we're all doing pretty well for ourselves because of guys like him.
Yeah.
So,
no, he's an amazing Ranger, and I wish we could, sit down and talk about him. Because there's a lot of people. I think I was talking to Keith Bach recently, and he was talking about Gunny and just the amazing impact that guy had on him. So okay. So you figure out the whole wife debacle, and what was that? Your initial years in Ranger Regiment like? You talked about how you're kind of jacked up, but after you got over being that terrible private that had no driver's license and a chick stashed away in Furcrest,
Yeah. Once I got over that, it took me a year or so. I got to Ranger School, and there's an interesting story about that I won't necessarily tell, but he had some trouble getting through there for a bit, and I finally got my tab and get back, and I decided like, hey, we're done. So I moved on from her and sent her back home, and at that point, I was able to like really start focusing on my craft. Right. I took it seriously as a private. I tried to figure out, what I was doing, but I was also like getting home at 5, 6 o'clock and having to deal with stuff that made me want to get divorced in the first place. So once I finally had time as a spec 4 to like live in the barracks, make my E5, start taking things a little bit more seriously, or at least I had time to kind of dig into it. I felt like I really started to pick up the pace of learning, and it felt better, and was learning a lot. And so did the standard path, couple years as a team leader, became a squad leader a little bit before 9/11, and and then did that for a couple years. I got a couple of deployments as a rifle squad leader and as a weapons squad leader, and kind of worked my way up. And then at some point they told me, hey, you've been around long enough, it's time to move over to AT. And then that was short lived. And so I left BCO after about 8 years there, and after a couple of deployments, and went over to I have the distinction of being known as the last support platoon sergeant at 275. If you remember that position, that was like purgatory for guys that are waiting for rifle platoons.
Yep.
And I got to be the last one of those, and I'm going to trump Will Richards by saying that before he showed up, me and Dave Kang, we were ECO. And,
okay.
So we kind of made that transition from the RS4, support platoon to laying the groundwork for the ECO and trying to integrate all those new guys and then standing up the company. And then a few months later, was fortunate enough to be selected to go serve in 2nd Platoon Charlie Company.
Yeah. Punishers.
Yep.
All right. All right. All right. Before we talk about your time as a platoon sergeant, there's a couple of things that I kind of want to pull out of you. So I remember the first trip to Afghanistan, you got the distinct mission. Bernie Felino was a platoon sergeant, correct?
Yep, he was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He was a platoon sergeant. And you got the distinct privilege of being the only squad that like actually got to do a real mission like the first month, where I think you guys went out. Didn't you recover that Russian? No. I'm sorry. You recovered the Chinook from Roberts Ridge, right?
Yeah. So that was one of the coolest things ever, and going back in time just a little bit to kind of tell this story. During 9/11, I've heard you talk about how we were in Germany, and
Yeah,
I was there. You mentioned Keith Bach. He was one of my fire team leaders.
that's right.
And I basically had, I think it was 5 or 6 new privates that I hadn't met before we got to Germany. So just before Germany, I was at RIP. They used to send us down there to be RIP TAC for.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Right. And so in August, I was RIP TAC, and guys that had graduated RIP in July showed up to my squad. I was at RIP TAC in August, and then I deploy overseas and meet everybody in Germany in September. And so we were, for lack of a better term, like we were not the best squad around. We had a long ways to go. But Keith, phenomenal fire team leader, just phenomenal leader all around. He was a team leader for me, and we took those guys and we trained our asses off. And I've got to give credit to those guys for putting up with what we put them through. But especially after September 11th happened, there was like an even larger or a bigger drive for us to just be the best, the best squad, the best fire team, all that stuff. There was just this immense drive that we had. And I remember being out on the range one night, and we're doing squad live fires, I think it was. And I had never been recocked in my life on a live fire, like period. No blank fire redos, move the saw gunner over here 10 feet, like none of that stuff. And that night we just kept getting recocked and recocked. And I told my PL, I said, "Hey sir," it was Jason Johnston at the time. I said, "Hey sir,
oh okay, yeah,
we're not going live tonight. So like, let everybody go to sleep and we're just going to work." And we ran that lane and variations of that lane until the sun came up. And that was just kind of our mentality in the squad, which is we're going to get this right. We're going to be the best at what we do. And, these, I think it was 5 brand new privates that had been in battalion less than a month. We all came together, and by the end of the deployment, the PL, once we finally went into the box and all that stuff, the PL was putting us, in the main effort, for the platoon, and it was a real confidence boost for the guys, to go through that training. And so anyway, fast forward a couple of months, we're in Afghanistan, and we're there, I don't know, 2 or 3 days, and Bernie Felino and Jason Johnston come over and they're like, "Hey, we're going to send you guys out. You're going to set up an OP and you're going to overwatch one of the helicopters that was shot down during Roberts Ridge, the one down in the valley, until we can recover it." And so we had no idea of what to expect. We had no idea really what we were doing. We loaded all of our gear down, and we have all this ammo and all these things, and looking back, like, wow, that was stupid. We had driven everybody out of there. We had, the terrain, as we all came to find out, was not, we were not fit for the, our gear wasn't, optimized for that sort of terrain. And so anyway, we learned some hard lessons out there. But it was awesome to be empowered enough after going through about a 6-month train up, that the first unit in 275, it's only going to be a fire team and some snipers and back in the day we called them ETAC, now a JTAC.
Yep.
And you guys, about 7 dudes, 8 dudes, you're going to hang out there for like 10 days overwatching this thing. And then we're going to come in and recover it. And it was not something we took lightly. It's something I look back upon fondly. Like we didn't do much. We overwatched it, but just the trust that they placed in us, the the ability of the guys to get us to that point, it was pretty awesome. And so I always look back on that as kind of a pinnacle, or a high point in my career.
So, and just to kind of, highlight for everybody that just doesn't understand, we're talking about like there's only like 3 or 4 major FOBs in Afghanistan at this time. We don't have Falcon View. We had like handheld GPSs that most of us couldn't even totally fit. Yeah.
I bought my own.
Yeah. And we all struggled to get them changed over to Afghanistan, because like depending on which one you bought, you couldn't even select that country. And we were using Russian maps. Like they were maps that the Russians had made that we'd replicated, because that was the best means we had to understand the terrain and everything else, because we weren't really anywhere during those times. This is, 5 months after September 11th, 6 months after September 11th, during this time. So, and you were a squad that was sent out. And how far was the drive? I don't remember.
So it was I won't talk about the location, but if you know the history, it was out, it was probably about a 2-hour flight actually from Bagram.
Right.
Down south. And thinking back about the equipment, like you're talking about, I just remember, I forget who the RTO was. Maybe it was Kenny Yazzie or something. He comes into me as PFC Yazzie, I think it was. And he hands me this radio and he's like, "Hey, this is a satellite radio and here's how you use it." And I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" Like we hadn't ever seen that stuff before.
Yeah.
And so it was quite a learning experience. But again, like the guys did awesome. We had great support from our JTAC, and every night we had aircraft flying around. And that was really the first time I got to, talk to them and tell them what to do. And it was really an awesome, experience to build upon.
Yeah, I remember when you guys came back, you guys were all wind burnt, had skin falling off your face, and Rothke was like, "You guys all need to go shave."
Yeah, the weather out there. I think it was early April. We got there in late March, and I remember like getting super sunburnt during the day, and then one night we actually got snowed on out there, and so we like experienced every weather thing out there, and it was just woefully unprepared for that. But anyway, it was good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's and it's amazing to be able to, be part of the recovery mission for that aircraft too, so. All right. So, going back forward, I guess, you being a platoon sergeant in 275, just during those times, I struggle sometimes to properly articulate what it was like to be a platoon sergeant. And I probably say it from a position of almost too much arrogance at times. And the reason I say it like that is because it's hard for people to understand how much we took on as platoon sergeants. We were literally the strike force, leaders, back in those days, because it was about volume of missions. And we've talked to General Votel and we've talked to General McChrystal about, some of the mentality and the thought process behind that. So we were just, they were powering things down to the lowest level. So that resulted on, platoon sergeants just leading these monumental efforts and these, coalition of all different kinds of agencies and people and everything else doing all this stuff. So what was it like, being a platoon sergeant during those times?
It was crazy. And that was where, I think we had really kind of started to see the evolution of the regiment starting to take place. So, backing up to when I was in BCO in 2004, lots of deployments patrolling around Afghanistan, valleys and GMVs, right? You remember all those days?
Oh, yes.
And then when I was in Echo Company, or HHC and Echo Company, that was the first deployment I missed. And that was when we were sending strikers overseas. So I was like outloading those things and getting them over.
Okay.
And that's when we started to really shift to the different types of targets we were starting to hit, and mobility being an increased emphasis, and all those kinds of things. And when you start tacking on, the contracted, dog guy, and the, all the technical stuff and all these things. And so I kind of missed that first, all those lessons learned that kind of came from that first iteration. And so I show up as a platoon sergeant in Charlie Company about 60 days before we deployed, and we're doing our exercises, and I'm like, "Who are you, and why are you here?"
Yeah.
Well, I'm from this agency, and I'm going out on target with you. And I'm like, "The hell you're not!" Like, the hell you are. I don't have room for you on my manifest. Why are you here? And he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, here's what I provide you." And I'm like, "Again, tell me how that's relevant." Like,
Yeah.
we do raids, and we're supposed to kill stuff. Like, why are you here? And then Yazi, we talked about him a minute ago, showing up as my TSE guy that we were just starting to.
Yeah.
I'm like, you do what? Why are you on my manifest? And so anyway, there was
so you're telling me you're going to wander around on the target and I got to protect you.
yeah. So just this huge learning curve that I'm going through because I missed like this one. I'm like, oh man, I got all these deployments as a squad leader. I got this, and then completely different environment. 1 year later, a year and a half later.
That's crazy. I never thought about that, but you're right, and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but well, one, it's an important part of Ranger history. Just so everybody knows, strikers, we were the first ones to have strikers in Iraq. It was not the Striker Brigade up at Fort Lewis, Washington. We had them, I think, 6 months because we, with money and everything else, they Rangerized them and rapidly shipped them over to us. We had them in Iraq before anybody else. But I think that was also part of the pivotal shift too. When those strikers showed up and we knew how to use them because we immediately sent guys to the school that late deployed that knew how to run the RWS and drive those things. And they were awesome at it. So when they showed up, all the other units were like, whoa, these things are way better than what we got. They're way more armored. IEDs are becoming a big thing. They're like, man, these things are better. And that was part of that mobility that we were actually ahead of everybody else because we had these amazing vehicles that provided significant protection, from some of the threats that we were providing. But I get what's, the other side is that iteration, because I was in Baghdad for that specific, year that you're talking about. We would still have to do the stuff that we normally had done, going and providing, outer cordon security for, other aid, other units. But then also we would start getting targets. So like, it was cool because we were doing stuff on our own, but then we would come back and they'd be like, hey, we got something else. And we'd have to like immediately load back up and go do it, do the same thing that we're doing for them until they figured out how to do it without us.
Yeah, exactly. We, I think that's where we really started to kind of scale into kind of the strike force model that we ended up with a few years later, where, driving around in Humvees or GMVs, whatever we called them back then, EFPs started to become a problem, those high powered IEDs. And so once we got Ranger a little bit of protection and some mobility where they could move around, now it was like, oh, you don't have helicopters? Well, you can just go drive, 45 minutes, go hit this target real quick and get back. And I think it really started to accelerate that innovation and that transition that we started to go through, that evolution, because now instead of 1 or 2 platoons getting some raids, now it's like 9 platoons are out getting all these same experiences. And then we all start sharing lessons learned and just really started to accelerate. And we're, like I said, we're bringing in new capabilities and we're figuring out how to use them all. And that was just a really fun time. And
it was. I forgot about the contracted dog handlers. I forgot about that.
Unfortunately, I only got one of those rotations because about 2 weeks before the end of my first rotation as a platoon sergeant was when I got shot in the leg. And so, leading up to that, it was so much fun. I was learning a ton. Like I said, I had a great platoon. I had gotten the platoon from Sergeant First Class Hall in 17 Charlie Company, and just an awesome guy. Had a great culture in the platoon, and everybody knew what they were doing. I just came in to help run stuff and just kind of do what I could. But they were awesome, and we had a lot of really good missions. We happened to, going back a minute ago, like you said, we got to the platoon sergeants kind of got to have more say into what we were doing and things like that. And I just remember many times sitting in the talk and and somebody comes in from the jock, and they're like, hey, we got this kind of target. And I remember Ray Fuller, he and I were in the talk together, and he's like, yeah, that's a BS target, we're not hitting it. And the person that came in from the jock's like, all right, roger that. So Ray Fuller's like making the call as the other platoon sergeant on what kind of raids they're going to go do. And we got to do that same thing. Me and the PL would consult, and that's the kind of empowerment that we had.
Yep.
Sometimes, we'd go because we had to. Other times we'd look at the target and be like, well, we watched it for a while, and here's a problem we see. And they would listen to us, and we didn't have to go hit it that night just because there was some opportunity. We knew that there might be a better opportunity the next night. And it, it was really, really cool to be empowered like that. And so it was a lot of fun. And we did a lot of good work in that rotation.
I agree. I mean, and those were fun, amazing times, where we were literally deciding, who would go out on target. 2-star generals would call us and be like, hey, can I get on your manifest? Not tonight, like, yeah. Maybe tomorrow night, sir, or whoever it was. But, and, in the development that, we would start to be able to navigate through the targets, which targets we wanted to do, where we would have team leaders and squad leaders watching the feeds, and watching all the chats and everything else. So they could literally see, and they'd pull shifts and to help develop the packets. And then also that helped them too, because of battlefield interrogation as well, when we would be on target. And just, I remember, being a platoon sergeant, and like, something would come in, and, the squad leaders and the team leaders would instantly be like, yeah, that's the target. That's the one we want. That's the, the thing that we need to go after, recommend, we drive or we fly. And if we fly, this is how we should do it, and stuff like that, and I'd been trying to get like 4 hours of sleep, and they developed this stuff, and it's just unbelievable, like how quickly that progressed. And that's, what I was talking about, like you leave regiment for, a year, or you're even in Ranger regiment, but you're not on the deployments, like you're all of a sudden behind the power curve.
Yeah. And, getting back to why those were such fun days, those squad leaders would be developing those things. And we would get, I think at the time we started in Mosul. And so, very dynamic back then, as you remember. Yeah. And we'd get this call, and within 10 or 15 minutes, we're like out the gate, but these guys, they knew the target, they knew what we were looking for. They'd been watching the compound all day or all night. And it was like, just very easy on the way there, hash out whatever we didn't already talk about. And when you get there, well-oiled machine, out goes, each side of the target, or however you're going to hit it. And we just started to, it just became, I mean, we all call it a battle drill, but like the platoon raid just became a battle drill. It was really it lived up to the definition of the term, and we just started getting so many reps, and we got so fast at it, and that kind of evolved, to the later years that other guys have talked about here, where doing 90 or 100 of those in a 90-day rotation, and it was easy. It just became second nature to how we operated.
Yeah, it's amazing how quick that traversed or changed and evolved, and it was revolutionary too at the same time, all just wrapped up into one. Well, let's and I forgot to highlight it in the intro, but you got shot as a platoon sergeant, you got the Bronze Star with V and a Purple Heart, obviously, for that. But as much as you would like to kind of just talk about that night and what happened and the response of the Rangers around you.
Yeah, for sure. So just to kind of set the scene, I talked about we were in Mosul, and we're doing a lot of striker raids back then, and just right before our deployment ended, we were standing up an outstation in Tikrit. And so my platoon moved down there to kind of make it ready for 375 coming in behind us. And we started doing a couple of targets out of there. And one night we did like the super fun raid from back then, right? Four Blackhawks. We're going to set up L shape and just have a blast, right? And And like with most missions that are going to be awesome, things, one thing kind of goes haywire, and then all of a sudden it's all bets are off, right? And so luckily, we didn't have a whole lot of contact that night. And so we made it through pretty unscathed, but, on infill, one of the squad leaders that we had in the platoon, he thought the bird came into flare, and he got brown out, and he thought he landed. And so he exfils the aircraft to go enter his building. And he wasn't on the ground. It was probably 30 or 40-foot drop, we think. And luckily he landed in a farming field. And but when he landed, he obviously took the butt of his rifle to his chin, jacked his back up pretty good, spitting some teeth out. And so when I landed, I get word that had happened. So I move over right away, and with Doc. And as soon as this happens, the squad that I was with and going to maneuver with starts taking contact. And so I'm like, oh, here we go. PL's like on this other side, because I'm over here, supposed to be with these guys. And so we just did the quick, hey, birds, come back around, just pick this dude up, and let's get him out of here. And so they end up taking care of the contact while I'm exfilling the squad leader. And so Doc and I, we end up making our way toward the target, and this other squad, second squad, they end up killing everybody but one, and he ends up running off and running around the target. And kind of a weird series of events where he was actually contained, because there ended up being a fence line that we didn't know about. We didn't see it on imagery or anything. So he ended up being contained to the compound. But it was a pretty big compound, a couple hundred meters, is the distance that he had on us. And but one of our BPs was on the outside of that, and they couldn't really make their way to it and in to go after this guy. And so he ends up once I make it to the house, I link up with that squad leader's squad who had fallen out of the aircraft. I'm like, okay, I got two team leaders here. I'm going to go kind of help them out. And that's my new spot, on the target. And I end up, we're trying to track this guy that got away, and end up, he like runs past me at some point, not past me, but like out of the corner of my eye as I'm pulling security, I see him. And so I call Doc. I'm like, hey, Doc, let's go get this guy. We can think the fire team's in here. They got their hands full with people in the house. So Doc, let's go. Lo and behold, like Doc had stepped away from me, like, 3 seconds before that. Yeah. So I run out there alone and unafraid, like 10 meters, not very far, but then me and this guy, we get in a gunfight pretty much right away. And as I get out there, I realize, all right, there's a light outside. I'm silhouetted behind, there's a light behind me. I'm silhouetted, and I can't see this guy because there's a different fence in between us and him. And there's a bunch of garbage stacked up against the fence, and he's shooting through it. He's using that stuff as concealment, but he's able to shoot through it. And so we get in a quick gunfight. I try to fix his position and return fire. And then all of a sudden I took a round to the right shin, and it was pretty much like getting hit with a sledgehammer. And then I just immediately fell to the ground and returned fire, and think I ended up, hitting the guy. But we were in a pretty close gunfight. I emptied almost, I think, 2 mags. They're just trying to stay, trying to protect myself, because, once I'm on the ground, he just opens up, and those bullets are flying right past me. And come to find out, he actually had a 90-round drum on his AK, and that's what he was going with. And so luckily I was only shot the one time. I think I hit him a couple times, but again, I couldn't see him. And so finally get the platoon or the guys on the horn, and they worked their way out to come grab me. But he was still alive. He had been wounded, I think, but they had to kind of work their way to come get me. it took them, I think, 2 or 3 times to come out and get me. And genius fire team leader pulls a flashbang, a 9-banger, throws it, in this other direction towards the guy to create a diversion. He starts orienting, the enemy starts orienting toward that 9-banger, and the guys were able to come out and drag me back into the house real quick and start treating me. So it got pretty sporty pretty quick. And I had phenomenal team that took me back into the house, started treating me right away. We dealt with we had the big 5, and the guys performed that stuff flawlessly that night, and ended up getting me out of there. And just funny story, back to 3rd Platoon BECO. One of the pilots that was flying us around out there actually used to be a team leader and a squad leader in our platoon back in Bravo Company, and his name is Chris Root.
Root. I was going to say Root. Yep.
And he ended up he got the call to come in and medevac me out. And so they bring me out to the aircraft, and I think I remember them putting, I was all drugged up at this point, but I think I remember them putting a headset on me, and he's like talking to me like, what the hell are you doing? Sort of a thing. And so it's just kind of a cool story that we get to share every once in a while. I think I'm going to see him next month. We'll talk awesome about that. And anyway, that was a long-winded way of saying I got out ahead of my skis, and I got whacked.
No, I don't think you got ahead of your skis, but it's an important story. I mean, it's what we'll go into, from here as far as, for the rest of the episode, but, just Ranger platoon sergeants, man, just in the fray, just getting after it during those times. It was unbelievable. And I remember seeing the ISR footage, I believe after that, and you returning fire after you got shot and everything else. It's pretty amazing, man. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people talk about that ISR footage. I'll back up a little bit. That team leader that dragged me into the house, or they helped drag me into the house and through the flashbang. Funny story. He got out of the Army a couple years later and spent about 6 or 7 years out, and came back in not too long ago. And he had my old squad in 3rd Platoon BECO, just like in the last year. So I saw him last week, and we talked about this a little bit. He's like, "Oh yeah, I remember. I saw that ISR video too." The funny thing about the ISR video is I was actually the one in the crosshairs when I got shot. They were tracking the guy, but we were so close that I was actually in the crosshairs when I got shot. And so you can see that, we've got it saved on the servers at work, and you can see, I can see that and relive it, anytime I want to. I don't do it all that often, but yeah, everybody claims they've seen that. It's pretty funny. I don't know how it got around, but it did.
Yeah, well, things like that always make their way around, there's lots of interesting videos that clip, or exist, especially back in those days when, you could plug thumb drives into secret computers. Don't do that, Rangers.
No,
do not.
Don't do that. But yeah, those were the days.
Those were the days. Yeah. All right. So, you get shot, you have a long road to recovery because of the injury, so what do you're starting the recovery process, and what did you find yourself doing at 275?
Yeah. I think that was the first time in my life where I kind of started to wonder, like, what's next? Yeah. What am I going to do? Because we always think we're going to get back to it, and to some degree, I was able to get back to it. But as I went through, I'm not going to tell all the recovery stories and all that, but it was roughly, I had 18 surgeries over the course of 18 months for various issues. I had a lot of different infections, so it wasn't all just related to the injury. I ended up having infections that needed multiple surgeries. I had some permanent nerve damage that they tried to repair, and some of that took and some of it didn't. So I ended up with, you see my leg, we call it a hamburger. It looks like a hamburger helper, sort of thing. And it took about 18 months of just kind of working in the S3 shop, and I'd come in during the day. I wanted to get back to the guys, right? So I would come into work when I'm supposed to be on con leave, and I would hang up these IV bags at my desk that have antibiotics in them because I've still got these infections going through me. And so I'm like sitting here at the desk, like, typing with IVs in, and guys are like, "What the hell are you doing?" I'm like, "Look, man, it's been a long road. I got to get back in to the office and just do something." And so I did that for a while, and and then I was fortunate enough to we had talking about the contract dog guys. We had realized that that wasn't a very good solution, right?
No.
And so Sergeant Major Pallister came to me and he said, "Hey, you want to stand up our dog program at Second Battalion?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't know crap about dogs, but yeah, let's do it."
I like dogs.
Yeah, I think I remember you telling me you wanted that job one day, so I just wanted to tell you, like, sorry about that.
I wanted a lot of different jobs. I was very confused of what I was going to do after being a platoon sergeant. So
yeah, now and so again, like thinking back to the first Afghanistan deployment, like I was super fortunate to have a responsibility like that entrusted to me, and we took and we went through the progression, and we ended up building 4 dog teams the first training cycle, 8 dog teams the second training cycle, and it was awesome. It was such a cool learning experience, and that's when I was able to kind of touch the magic again. We'll say is I had to accompany the guys on target to make sure the dogs were performing as advertised, right? And so I ended up getting my fix that way. Hey, Brian Barker, First Sergeant Stover, let me tag on to your manifest here and go out and look at my dog guys, and so I got to rotate around the battlefield and see all that. And when I wasn't feeling up for it, then I just watched ISR and worked on the training calendar. And when I was feeling up for it, I got to hop on a 47 or a 60, and it was awesome. And so did that for a bit, and then went over to the recce platoon.
Yep.
Worked there with James Hayes, phenomenal platoon leader that I know you had as well.
Yeah,
learned a lot from that
the
guy.
rooster.
Learned a ton from that guy, and lived that life for about 18 months, and then it was time to go back to the 3 shop and keep rowing. And by that point, I had I'm wondering, like, okay, I'm probably not going to get back to being in a rifle platoon. The recovery is just not there. But I got my platoon sergeant time in recce, and so I made the E8 list, and I'm like, okay, well, I can make the case that I was a rifle platoon sergeant, I was a recce platoon sergeant, I was a dog platoon sergeant. Like, I'm one of the most experienced platoon sergeants you got. I've been around.
Absolutely.
I've missed 2 promotion lists. I've been around so long, and so you should make me a first sergeant, sort of a thing. And so but then RASP-2 had become a requirement shortly before that, and so it wasn't in the cards. I had been slated to take a company, but couldn't make it through the physical portion of that, and so ended up just rowing in the 3 shop for as long as I could, hung on for as long as I could, and then after about 18 years, the second time they said, hey, it's time to move on, and so that's what I did.
Yeah, you oversimplified that last part about wanting to be a first sergeant, and not unfortunately not being able to meet the 5 miles in 40 minutes. Like, it ain't for a lack of trying. Like, you got additional surgeries. You ended up going to the rehab clinic also and doing that extended program down there. You got fitted for, I don't know what they would call it, a partial prosthetic or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. So part of the injury recovery, we made a decision to salvage my leg, to not amputate. And looking back, I don't know if that was the right decision, wrong decision. You can't look back on that stuff. But I wasn't recovering like I should. So the Center for the Intrepid is what it's called down there. And
that's right.
We were sending some guys. There was a guy down there doing some experimental stuff where he was taking carbon fiber and these rods and turning them into, basically, they're kind of like prosthetics for people who have legs. It has it's the shape of your foot, and it's got a rod that goes up the back of your leg, and then a big piece up at right below your knee. and the rod is there to help flex and kind of provide your foot some lift, as you run or walk. And so that allowed me to sort of get back to it, but I couldn't ever really get there. I could do the 12-mile road marches. I could do that kind of stuff. The run was suspect, and I was close on the standards. And I, looking back, I probably should have said, hey, I shouldn't go, but I was close, and I was like, this is the only shot I got.
Yep.
Another interesting story with one of your other guests was, a week before I went down to RASP too, I was the rear D NCO. I think you were back there with, we had Ruben, I think, back there.
Oh yeah, Ruben. Yep.
Maybe you were forward already. Maybe you were deployed. I don't remember. But about a week before I go to RASP, get a phone call like, "Hey, Justin, Vinny, first sergeant got shot," and I'm like, "Oh, now I really got to make it because I'm supposed to go replace him in Alpha Company."
Yep.
And so, I came down. I tried, wasn't successful. Like you said, it wasn't for lack of trying.
No,
but it was really that was really, I knew kind of then, like, that's the end of my time here. It's time to move on. But I had really felt like we take stuff on, right? I had let the team down. They were counting on me to go and replace Justin a week after my RASP class, because that's when everybody got home and that's when the change of responsibility was going to be. But instead, he was shot. We flexed Dalton over there to run the company for a little while, who was also injured, but he just happened to be overseas and could kind of take on that role. And then that was about it. Hung out for a little while longer, and then it was time to move on.
It's funny that you bring up Vinny getting shot too, because when they knew that you weren't a viable option, I was the second option, and but I was back for that because of a bunch of personal shit that I was dealing with at the time. And I remember talking to Daryl Thies, and he calls me and he's like, "Hey, we need you to come over and take over for Vinny," and you talk about let down the team. I was like, I want nothing more in the world to do this, but I cannot do this right now, like, because of just the shit that I was dealing with, which doesn't need to be talked about, but, because this isn't about me, but, so I get that feeling, and it was in a different way, obviously, but at the same time, people took care of us, guys like Daryl Thies and Bernie Foligno and, Sergeant Major Albertson as well, they took care of us. So
yeah, real quick, if I could, on that, like there's a reason I was able to get shot 10 years into Regiment and then hang out for 8 more. And I say hang out, but I kind of talk about what I was able to accomplish. Like, guys like them took care of me and allowed me to remain viable, and a contributor.
So, before we talk about, your time down at Regiment and RSA, what was, I don't know quite how, to capture this, but wanting to stay relevant, productive, and be part of a contributing member of the Ranger Regiment, you could have easily just walked across the street and been a first sergeant, at the Stryker Brigade or any of the other, units, there. What just made you want to stay and continue to try to do this within Ranger Regiment? What drove you? Because these were difficult times. I mean, let's not highlight over the fact that you got fucking shot, which is, traumatic all in its own as well.
Yeah. Nobody ever wants to leave, right? The guys that do leave, they kind of have to, I think, in most cases. Either they get told to leave, they did something that make them have to leave, or there's some extenuating circumstance in their family, or they've got a health issue. But guys don't just decide to leave the Ranger Regiment. Like, there's always some higher calling that maybe is driving them in that direction, but there's always a reason. And I didn't really have any of those other reasons. My reason was, I love this place. It has taken care of me for all these years. I want to take care of it. I want to do what I can to give back much. There's no way I could give back more than I got, but how do I continue to give back so that someday that payment is somewhat equitable? How do I make up for all the things that all the people did for me over all these years? And frankly, that continues to this day. You know, I've got the job I've got opportunities I've gotten because of the people that continue to take care of me and look out for me. And so I hope to do the same, you know, for other guys and gals now. And so that's what I'm trying to do. Just make the organization better by taking care of the people, which is, you know, currently the regiment's #1 priority.
Yeah, absolutely. So you go down to the RSH shop down at RHQ, you know, talk about that time and the innovation and the, you know, creativity and everything else that you got to see the magic of Ranger Regiment, I suppose, in a different light.
Yeah.
And once in a while, send me a cool package with some cool gear, but we don't.
It's kind of ironic because at 275, I was the Force Mod NCO when I was like my first job in the S3 shop, you know, as I was recovering. And Reese Teakle was the RS8 at the time.
Oh, shit.
And I hated it. I hated force modernization. I kind of still hate it to this day because there's a number of reasons why, right? Like, rightfully so, the guys always want better kit, and they should. And so what I hate is like the bureaucracy and the challenges that come with doing that. Because I'm always the guy. I'm always the bad guy. Like, hey guys, I know you want this thing. It's coming in 12 months, and they're like, oh my God, I need it right now. And I'm like, I know you do, but I've got to be the guy that delivers that, you know. So I learned a lot about the job. I spent 4 years doing that before I retired, and learned a ton about not just regiment and all the things that the guys are innovating with at the unit level, but really how special operations, the Army, DoD operates. When you start to learn about how money works, and you can follow the money, you know, throughout the DoD, and you start to understand these bureaucracies and how challenging they are to navigate. What I started to figure out is like it's kind of the iteration we did early on in the war, where we went through this process, and this thing was really hard to get over the goal line. So how do we shorten that? How do we make that better? What's the AAR from this thing? And over the course of a couple of years, I was able to start making these pitches like, hey guys, to the commanders, like, hey gentlemen, we hate the way that acquisitions and modernization works, but check out where we can take slack out of the rope, and look, if you give the right guys in the shop this empowerment or these resources, look what we can do for you. And so that's kind of what I've taken on as a civilian, is really formalizing how we can modernize faster within our resources and our abilities to do so. And so, you know, this is always super boring for people to talk about with me, but it's like it's a new calling for me. You know, there's a pain point in the regiment. There's a problem with modernization writ large, and I'm trying to figure out ways to do it better. And we're actually having a lot of success right now. So I want to figure out how to scale that. You know, once I kind of get this all worked out, how do we scale this and become more responsive for the guys' needs, and how do we get more innovative and have less of the innovative ideas that die because there's nowhere for them to go. So that's kind of what we're, you know, what I ended my career with, and then kind of transitioned into with a couple things in between there.
Yeah, it sounds like you could start writing some doctrine for Futures Command, but you know, we won't talk about that.
We will not talk about that. That's the worst part. Like I said, I hate force mod. You know.
Yeah. So what is your current position? I know I just give the acronym, but what is it? What is it actually that you're currently doing for the 75th?
Yeah. So it's a directorate in the staff that we stood up. So it used to be the RS8. Well, we decided we needed a civilian over the top, and the section, it's called the RAID. It stands for Requirements, Acquisition, Integration, and Development. So really, when you boil that down, you know, as you get older in your Army career, you start to figure out, like, you can't fund things that aren't requirements. So we've got to have good requirements that are written, that stand the test of time, that allow us to modernize against. We've got, in the D, we got the development. Those are all the NCOs, those former platoon sergeants that are out there just hungry, looking for the next tech, looking for the next piece of kit. And they're trying to work with our requirements guy to say, hey, here's the direction we need to go. And then I got an acquisition section where we just got an acquisition officer last year. We formalized that position. So now, like, we bring this guy into the regiment that has this expertise that we've been wanting for decades now. And so he is able to really help us accelerate how we get after buying this stuff and shortening these timelines. And he speaks the language, he's trained in all that stuff. And so he's doing that. And then our integration guy, really, he's the one that looks at when this new stuff comes in, who needs to train with it? What's our new equipment training look like? How many are we fielding to who? And that sort of thing. And then he also manages like what our structure looks like, whether it's MTO billets or whatever. So he helps us to manage that. So it's a phenomenal team. It's a great experience, figuring out how to continue to add value to the regiment. And so I'm super glad to be, again, entrusted to build this thing. And so far it's worked. We'll see. We got a long ways to go, but I've been at it for about 18 months now, and we've had some pretty good wins.
See, it's just unbelievable to me, people just don't realize it, but 23 years ago, like, we were blown away that we got this new body armor that had this like laced kind of material on it that you could put pouches on. They didn't let us put the pouches on it, but you could. Right. You remember that, that we still had to wear the rack vest and like this crazy concept. To now, like, Rangers, the things that they're developing internal. I was having a very long conversation with another mutual former Ranger that we were talking about, and some new drone things that they were working on. It's amazing where we've went in 23 years, and now we have this cell that's sole purpose is to modernize the force, and that will all trickle out. General Rotel talked about it, of how Rangers have innovated and evolved things that have become, especially like tactics and stuff, they become common practice, in the conventional Army. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're trying to do with, on the acquisition side. You mentioned AFC, they're moving out and as fast as they can on some things. And we're right down the road from the maneuver center. It's called the CDID, and then they're the guys that kind of write the requirements for the Army. And so we're trying to stay as tied in with those guys as we can and say, hey, look, before you go down the road too far on this thing, like, come out to these Ranger exercises and let's look at this and let's talk about this and let's get, let's get you guys involved earlier so we don't waste money, time and resources. And now we end up with the Bradley or whatever, we end up with something that's going to work right out of the gates, or as close as we can, that the Army adopts, because the other thing we find is, sometimes our requirements come across as like, you guys just soft guys. You just want the Gucci stuff, and it's like, well, no, if we can, and look, if the Army, you don't have to field this stuff to everybody, but taking dual tube nods, for example, like, we've tried to sell them on that and say, we can't scale that to all these people. Like, no, but think about the safety of if your drivers had them, or if you, whoever those folks may be that need them. And we've tried to make that case, we may have this piece of tech, we may be using it one way, but here's how you can apply it to your force in a way that makes sense. And we've had some successes with that stuff. And so we're just trying to do that, live in the charter, I think is a good way to say that, as best we can. Yeah. No, I mean, and that's amazing to hear that you guys have that relationship and how much money, but then also lives and resources and everything else it'll change. I mean, you brought up dual tube nods. Like, so what I ended up doing is I ended up calling out of our old Ranger like playbook when I was over at 2CR, that the Army Depot for loaning equipment that is not good enough for one unit, but it's good enough for the rest of the Army, and got the PVS 6s, the pilot nods. Yep. And that's what we did in Ranger Regiment. That's how we got
the same thing when I was the Force Mod NCO. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I did that. Yeah, I did that for 2CR and prioritized that drivers have them. And, but like, so 2CR, most of the drivers over there now, for all their vehicles and everything else, have dual tube nods. And, it's crazy, that one specifically, like if we take the amount of money that the military spent on night vision, and if they had just invested in dual tube nods a decade ago, it probably would have actually ended up saving money, It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And it's, that's kind of the tension that we've got, there's the push and pull, they tell us they got to resource 400,000 people or whatever. And we're like, no, you don't, let's think about this and
prioritize it
and try to solve some of these problems that frankly, like, over the decades, we got a lot of the same problems, that we used to have. And anyway.
No, I agree. Well, so, working, you're in the meetings, you're working for Regiment, I'm curious to your thoughts, just kind of the evolution of things over the last, decade in Ranger Regiment and, what you see as kind of the future of where Ranger Regiment's going, in, I guess, what we could call the global war, or the global competition that we're currently in.
Yeah. That's the other thing, reading a lot of these, strategic documents, never thought I'd be doing that, but with the current job I've got, it's what I got to do. And
look at us now, we're reading strategic documents, man.
Nerds. But you kind of see where everybody's going, where the DoD is going over the next 10, 20, 30 years, and we've really started to look at how do we adopt that, and how do we not only build the right force for 10 or 15 years from now, but how do we maintain what we've got while everybody else transitions, in case there's the black swan event that happens again, the next 9/11. How do we stay ready while everybody else modernizes and changes? And so we've done a lot of that. Coming out of Afghanistan the last couple of years, we have started to focus back on our increased readiness. I don't want to say we're not ready, but we definitely had to take an appetite suppressant on some of that while we were deploying,
absolutely,
four or five Ranger companies at one time. So we had to kind of slow that down, right? So we've refocused on some of those fundamentals, and really gone back to the basics. A lot of talk right now about the big five and just being masters of fundamentals. And as we go back to that 2005, 2008 timeframe, we talked about all the different iterations and how all the platoons got reps. That also resulted in, we did a lot of things differently after a while. And so we're kind of starting to have to re-baseline everybody and just kind of get back to some of those things that some of our foundation that made us successful and allowed us to then iterate when we needed to iterate on certain problems we had. So a lot of focus on that. And, I'm really excited to see where we're going over the next couple of years. You mentioned there's not a Ranger Rendezvous, on schedule. That's because our current commander has gotten 3 years in the seat. And so that's phenomenal, because we're able to take his vision year one and hopefully live that thing through, which is a lot different than, you're probably used to with commanders coming in for 2 years. It takes them a year to kind of figure themselves out. And then you got kind of a year to implement different things. And a lot of times you just don't make that progress. And so we're really excited to keep driving the regiment forward, but not in a different way. It's back to fundamentals, it's basics, but we're more enabled through technology. We've consolidated all the stuff we learned throughout the GWOT, and it's just going to make us, better for the next one.
No, I appreciate it. And I appreciate you talking about that, because you're kind of the first person that we've had on that has, day-to-day interactions that can talk about that stuff. I am planning on reaching out to Donaldson, so I'm giving him a little time to get settled into retirement before I call him, but I plan on calling him up too. So
yeah, let him get off of terminal leave and stuff.
Yeah,
give him a while.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of close out, the episode, I always kind of ask the guest, because, it's the genesis behind the podcast, why, just overall, what did this, the Brotherhood of Ranger Regiment, and sisterhood, I suppose, is, we modernize in that aspect as well. What did it mean to you, and why is it important for people to stay tied into the Ranger network?
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by this, by the different responses on this one. So hopefully I can do it some justice. It's the brotherhood. First of all, is it's super important to for us to remember our legacy and to continue to build our legacy. When you leave the regiment, you're still a ranger, and you're still contributing to that legacy, whether you come back to Ranger Rendezvous or you end up being a senator, or something in between. You're running a farm like I think Donaldson's doing. Whatever you do, you're going to take the values that you learned, and whether that's in the creed or Roger's standing orders, like whatever they may be, wherever our values that you hold dearest, and you're going to live that stuff for the rest of your life. And so I think where the brotherhood to me is super important is that we have as long as we can maintain that brotherhood, we have a network that can solve any problem. I've seen, if you're on social media, you've seen the calls for help. You've seen the suicide stuff that, hey, this guy, he needs help tonight. You've seen, hey, this Ranger's house burnt down and they need help. You've seen, hey, my kid is having this medical problem and I don't know what to do. Or even simple stuff that we all go through, like, hey, what VA benefits am I entitled to? I've been out for 20 years and I have no idea. All of those things contribute to, like I said, it's a huge network that we can all contribute to. And I ask everybody out there, do something to contribute to that network. I don't care what it is. I don't care if you get involved with a charity, or if you just check in on your Ranger buddy every once in a while, but contribute to that network. There are, we all know different organizations to get involved with. Army Ranger Lead the Way Fund, Sua Sponte Foundation, Point to Hawk Foundation, Three Rangers. There's all kinds out there. You can link up with motorcycle riders. You can join the Killer Man Sons. I ride with Sons of Mosby Motorcycle Association. We're no requirements other than you served in a Ranger unit and you've got a motorcycle. And we get together a couple times a year and we just have a great time talking and just, enjoying our love of motorcycles. Get together and do platoon reunions. We started doing one last year for 3rd Platoon BCO, and we've got another one coming up next month, about 3 weeks out, and it's going to be awesome.
That's going to be crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and so you just get to keep reliving the stuff. You get to keep touching the magic, if you will, and it just on a bigger scale, it just allows you to stay connected and be able to help whenever you can provide something for somebody that needs it. And I think that's super important. We all relied on each other our first day in battalion, and we're going to continue to rely on each other, until the end. And so I'm just super thankful to be part of an organization that takes their history and their legacy seriously, and it keeps us all tied together.
I appreciate it, man. It was definitely well said. The only thing I would add is also, make sure you're helping to add credibility to the legacy, not detracting from it. So
yeah, absolutely. Everything you do, I mean, it all goes back to the legacy, right? So don't screw that up. Don't be that guy.
Yeah, don't be that Ranger. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you got any kind of?
We did that when we were younger. We shouldn't do that now.
Yeah, like I said, we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah, right.
Well, you got any kind of closing thoughts, or anything you want to say? Just kind of close us out here before I say goodbye.
No, I just thanks for having me. First of all, never thought I'd do this in 100 years or a million years, but I'm sort of glad I did. We'll see how it turns out.
It's gonna be awesome.
And just I think kind of the last point I talked about is kind of what I'd close with is the Rangers that you grew up with, the old Rangers that you run into. We're all kind of the same. We all kind of have the same issues. We got kind of the same hobbies, and we all love doing the same kind of things. And so rally around that. Rally around what brings us all together, and do what you can to help. And now that I'm a Ranger civilian, I've also got to say, for you folks that are still working with military, I guess I'm kind of divergent here a little bit, but for with you working, you folks still working with the military, bring those civilians into the fold too. We call ours, civilian rangers or ranger civilians, and they contribute to the team just as much, if not more. And I think it's super important that no matter what team you're in, if you're not affiliated with the military, take what we've learned, take our values, take our brotherhood, and build that in your community or at your job or whatever you do, because that's the only way we're going to continue to move forward.
Yeah. Well said, my friend. Well said. All right. Well, Kevin, thank you for coming on to the show today. I know everybody's just going to be pretty excited, to hear from you and catching up with you and seeing what you're currently doing. And you're still serving in the 75th Ranger Regiment, doing amazing things. Hey, thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Legends of the 75th podcast. Please share this episode so we can make sure all of our Ranger buddies know about it. Rangers lead the way.